I begin, I just want to also just acknowledge kind of the root of or the tradition of my organizing. It does extend back to Ella Baker and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And if we understand the history of Black struggle in this country, then we can also actually trace the organizing, Black youth organizing back to even prior to that. If we kind of in Jay Gillian's Education for Insurgency, he notes that the average age of a runaway slave during slavery was between 13 and 39. So, right, this idea of young people moving towards freedom has been a constant and internal impulse. And then this connection around learning, right? Again, understanding the history of settler colonialism in this country, where Black and other oppressed folks could not read, learning then became this kind of first initial act of liberation. So you take that and then you fast forward it through a fight around segregation and integration into schools, and then take that another 50 years later, and their response to that, and you get this prison school to prison pipeline, right? And then we enter the story there, right? And I also want to just acknowledge that along the way in my personal journey, like we have had deaths, and it's been in these deaths that we have found more energy, more fight. So I just want to lift up the name of George Carter III, LaPortia Massey, Raheem Brown, and most recently Malika Bryant, right? And that it's been in these moments of death that young people have found themselves, found each other, and tried to move the fight forward. So a lot of again, when I entered youth organizing, I was in Washington, D.C. At the time. Youth organizing, the trend was around college access, right? And trying to figure out how we break down the barriers of young people getting into college. I think this is connected to even what we understand some of the strategies that were happening in the 60s with the Black Panther Party and other folks trying to get more Black folk on campus or Black students on campus as a means to continue to organize. You have Maria Fernandez, who was at the time at the Sisters and Brothers United. They went through a whole thing where they created their own student success centers, and even at one point were piloting programs at that particular point. And at that moment, what was happening is then groups were winning a lot of local victories, but what they were experiencing was that their victories were being tempered by what we understood federal policy. So they would be like, oh yeah, it's federal law that says we have to discriminate against Black kids wearing their baseball caps backwards, right? So then there's a moment that emerges in 2018 after, again, 12 years of Reagan and Republican politics where it felt like there was no federal opportunity. Obama and the sunsetting of No Child Left Behind, which was the policy carrying of zero tolerance, then sets the stage for the Alliance for Educational Justice to emerge, right? And 19 youth organizing directors come together in a moment. There's also other happenings happening, right? There's CEPR happening. There's a communities organizing for public education reform, creating all these spaces for folks to come together and try to figure out that. And that moment opens up, and the Alliance is born in that particular moment to try to amplify the local victories and actually extend those victories and generate more on the local ground. I think we learned so much in that work and in that time. I think a lot of the theories that we thought were going to be true proved not to be true, right? And then there was a way that we now understand, kind of going back, and another opportunity as the kind of federal doors open, that actually the local organizing and the wins there actually set the ground and the base of what federal policy would be. Federal policy is no more progressive than what is won on the ground. So this need to really build strong local campaigns, like we've been seeing with the police-free schools, set the stage and make the argument. Because the first thing we would get in the meetings, they'd be like, well, where is it in the world? Can you show it to us? We need evidence, right? And so the stuff that we're winning on the ground, and being able to implement and drive those kind of set the stage. I think the other piece that we want to look at is also 2012, when we had massive school closings happening all over the country. And again, young people beginning to organize. And one of my beautiful moments is actually the Journey for Justice Alliance. And I see Parrish from Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. Youth organizers helped build the National Parent Organizing Network. So we were organizing parents on a national level and continue to be a core part of that, but understanding, right, kind of strategically that we needed a bigger set of fights, and we needed to even figure out how we help other folks build national networks to join us in this fight. And so just want to lift up Journey for Justice as one of our close education partners, a parent organization that we've had a lot of solidarity with, who've had our back early on in some of the assaults, particularly the assault at Ben Franklin, Philadelphia, where J4J leaders showed up there in support. And so I got about 2 minutes left. 2015, the assault at Spring Valley. Again, another watershed moment in youth organizing. Like the survey says, Black girls doing the thing, right? Nia Kinney organizes a cop watch, tells the other students to record Officer Fields, and the interaction is going to happen with Shakar because she already knew. And then after she's body slammed and dragged off, Nia gets up and tries to stop that, is arrested. Young people all over the Alliance, all over the country, unite behind this. They start this beautiful campaign where they're writing Nia and Shakar love letters. 2015 FCYO conference, we bring Nia to the conference. They read these letters on stage. We're all crying, and we all make a commitment that we're going to free Nia, we're going to free Shakar, and we're going to build a campaign to get police out of our schools. That is the beginning of the national campaign for police-free schools. And while I appreciate people talking about it as a movement, understand it's a campaign, and that there are folks who are organizing and leading this work, thinking about it strategically, building with each other. And we welcome those who are joining the fight, but this is not a new fight. This is not just dropped out of the sky. This has been the result of many years of organizing. Shout out to the Black Organizing Project, again, with the death of Raheem Brown, literally starting a 10-year campaign to get police out of Oakland schools. And we don't want to also miss Measure QQ, right? And Oakland Kids First, and the winning the right to vote in elections. And as we think about what is the next stage, we're clear as school districts are removing police from schools temporarily. If we're not building the power to create the kind of school culture that we want and to keep them out, they will be back. And so, so being able to figure out how we build power, how we really look at how we take over school districts, I think is an important piece for us to think about. And again, in the larger context of this country, if we understand Black and brown students, the country is getting Blacker and browner day by day. And the first site that we have a majority minority, if you will, institution is in education, right? Since 2014. And every education policy, everything we've seen since then, I would argue has been a reflection of that. But that gives us the ground to dream and think about that. And as we talk about it in the campaign, the work that we're doing around trying to abolish school policing is a seed to a society in the world without police. And we understand that that's always the orientation around young people and their organizing, right? They win things that they don't ever get to experience, but they're leaving something behind for the next generation. So looking forward to being in conversation with y'all. I hope I did some justice to the topic, and open and willing and really excited to hear from y'all and y'all experiences. Thank y'all.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. I so appreciate hearing you tie back to the beginning, truly the beginning of the American history. And we know if we look in Indigenous communities in our country that youth organizing and leadership goes back to way before the founding of the United States. I mean, making those long connections that when we stand up today and ask for police to be out of schools, it builds on a very long legacy of so many generations. I'm so blown away and also not surprised, but just touched by how many people in this group have been organizing since they themselves were youths. That's definitely my story. I started when I was 12 in the environmental justice movement, way back in the early 90s, and found my way into finding a career where I could still work alongside youth organizers as my hair gets grayer and grayer and grayer. So yeah, I guess that puts me at 32 years in this field since I was 12 years old. And I think for some of us to be able to say that when we're, only in our 40s is a success of the movement. For those of you that are like on this group that are saying you started when you were 6 and you're already, 15 years into youth organizing, like we're holding it down, right? We're passing on, we're supporting, and we're lifting up. My goal here is just to lift up a little bit of the research and get you to pop open the report if you haven't already from all the links that have been done. I'm sure Kel can toss it in one more time. But on page 16 of the report, we give a little snippet, and Jonathan shared so much of the rich story. I don't have to get into it now, but here's a couple of key points to know that's in there as a resource to you to use it. One is that there's a ton of research that's been done on the school to prison pipeline, on the police-free schools movement, and how this is a major win of youth organizing in the United States. So when funders ask, can you prove that youth organizing works? There's citations in there of over 10 really strong articles and books that document this specific movement and all of the things Jonathan just said. So those are there as a resource for you. Mostly I'm pointing out the footnotes are a powerful resource in terms of holding up and lifting up. And a lot of those scholars are young scholars of color who are also changing our academy through studying this work. I want to say that the relationship between education systems and the prison industrial complex was the most commonly referenced campaign issue in our with the 59 people we talked to in our focus groups. This is the issue when you ask people what has been the arc of youth organizing in the United States, in every single focus group this came up. Stories came up about how this was people's personal stories, how being incarcerated, having a family member incarcerated, how dealing with police in their schools has formed them as activists. There's so much richness in there. We could have written, and we played with the idea of writing a separate 30-page report just on this one issue. There is so much there in the legacy of our communities working on this. And the youth organizers, as Jonathan just pointed out, are making a direct through line from the early work, coining the phrase push out, to watching it show up in Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, right? Like that didn't happen by accident. Bernie Sanders just didn't invoke the idea or come up. 30 years ago across the country and communities, young people were coming up with these ideas of calling it push out instead of drop out. Talking about the school to prison pipeline. These things happen because of long and sustained work over many, many years. A new term that's popping out of this field that I wanted to highlight was the idea of now calling it a justice reimbursement, that we have to reimburse our communities for the lost justice by taking the funding out of police and policing in schools and investing it in counselors, in healthcare clinics, in wraparound supports that we know, and in youth organizing itself that we know lift young people up. In the survey, 42% of the organizers say they lead campaigns to improve school climate and school discipline policies specifically. 34% are working on campaigns to improve school wellness or school-based health services. 27% are working to expand mental health, and 24% are targeting juvenile justice. And really, a lot of that is focused on reducing incarceration of young people, period. It's powerful work. There's a lot of it out there. And it's humbling to be in community with so many of you who have been leading this work since you were 7 years old. Thank you. Thank you. And our report humbly tries to capture just a snippet of it.
Thank you, Jonathan and Michelle. As previously mentioned, I'll be helping curate our slightly shorter discussion time. Apologies if there are any interruptions as I talk. My internet, as I'm sure we've all experienced, is being slightly slower today, but I'll leverage the chat box to caption my questions as I share. We'd love to start off by asking if there are any clarifying questions from the group, and feel free to use the raise your hand button or the chat. All right, then that's sort of great for us because we have really a question that we're really excited about. So because there's so much experience and expertise in the Zoom room with us, we want to ask the group, from your particular vantage point or experiences, where do you see this moving? Where do you see this moving when we're looking 20 years into the future? What are folks visioning or freedom dreaming? And again, feel free to use the raise your hand button or type up your answer in the chat, as we want to honor the different modalities that might feel comfortable for sharing.
"20 years into the future" is kind of scary. We can also talk about like 2 years into the future, or what campaigns folks are working on like today, if that's more comfortable.
I see Maria, if you'd love to share, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you both for the kind of mini history on youth organizing, and then a sense of what the report says. I'm excited to read it and engage with it, and share it with the staff team who supports youth organizing across the country. My name is Maria. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Advancement Project National Office, and get the honor and privilege to work with Jonathan, feels like every day, on helping to support youth groups and build the campaign for police-free schools nationally. And I think for me, something that feels really exciting about this particular moment in the fight for police-free schools, that I hope can continue in the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years, is really a return to radical politic in youth organizing. I think there was a moment in the 90s where it became like race was stripped out of the conversation around youth organizing, and it became heavy leadership development programs. And even now with the report, I'm struggling with the number of organizations that are, quote, part of the youth organizing sector. And it feels for me that the kind of the intentionality of the Police Free Schools campaign around grounding the fight around abolition, around being clear about the impact of Black young people and the legacy of Black organizing, and the conversations that are happening right now, even as the demands, like we stopped using counselors, not cops, because we know counselors can be carceral actors, right? So we no longer use that frame, and are trying to make interventions around kind of those conversations nationally. But I'm really excited about the potential. And what does it mean for Black young people of color, Indigenous young people, queer and trans young people, students with disabilities, right? To start to think about this work around power and self-determination, and actually put that into practice. So I'm just really excited about all of it, and want to be able to continue to contribute to that in my work, and also just, again, making sure that we're not talking about organizing young people for the sake of just bringing young people together, but that we're actually talking about building power. So that's just kind of where I am, and stuff that I'm excited about in the next couple of years.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we're all so just buoyed by some of the potential, and just hearing all of your expertise and where you're coming from is so exciting, and I think really helps us imagine the future and springboard into the potential possibilities. Are there any others that want to share? I know Parrish has shared in the chat as well, and I would sort of cue everyone to read the chat and make sure you're not missing those as well. And I'm seeing Aria. If you'd like to share, we'd love that.
Hi, I'm Aria. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Youth on Board in Boston, and I'm 19. I'm sort of in that in-between stage of like, am I a young person? Am I adult? Like, that's just some weird water that I'm still trying to figure out for myself. But I am a college student at Suffolk University. I've like to consider myself a youth activist since I was really young. My dad went through busing, and that was a big issue specifically in Boston. So he taught me a lot of the youth advocacy work, and how to sort of defend myself going to a predominantly white elementary and mostly middle school. So I was able to definitely see what the school to prison pipeline really was, like in full effect, without really having the name attached to it, until I really got into Youth on Board when I was about 15 or 16 years old. There was actually a definition of what I was able to see, the constant targeting of, people that look like me or students that look like me, just because like, or we make like a small mistake, how there are some disparities there in terms of quote unquote punishment, how there was a lack of humanity in terms of administration and teachers, and how that sort of led to a lot of folks either leaving schools or like switching districts, but like that was the intent of everything. So I always wanted to get into civil rights, and I actually want to be a civil rights lawyer. So I was trying to find a way to like get some experience early on as an activist. So I joined Youth on Board, and we sort of used, and we were able to learn a lot about the school to prison pipeline, and sort of also at the same time inform students in Boston public schools what their rights were as a student, based on the code of conduct within our district, so that, administration couldn't, well, that didn't mean that they didn't do it anyway, but they shouldn't be enforcing regulations that weren't in that policy that was made to protect students and families. So there was an app surrounded by the work that we did in order to inform students on what their rights were. Yeah, exactly. So that was very helpful. And it was helpful for me too, because there was like, I don't know, something that was able to protect me. And there's almost like this stigma that students don't have rights when they're in a classroom, which we obviously know that's not the case, but that's a way of almost silencing young people. So I was a part of a lot of that work, being in the program until I graduated from high school in 2019, and I decided to stay as an alumni. So I'm currently still in the program and an ally to young people, even though I'm so close in age with them, like by like 1 or 2 years. But I think that's really helpful for me to really understand what they're still going through. And as I still get older, it's like still being an ally and understanding that based on my experiences too. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background on the school to prison pipeline. I guess looking into the future, I mean, in a perfect world, I would hope that students were confident in what they knew and being able to have the confidence to stick up for themselves, but it's not that easy. So I don't know, having a lot more adult allies in terms of administration within our school districts is really important. And also implementing a lot more counseling, or like just general humanity in any type of code of conduct or any policy that's implemented into districts, mainly because, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of policy is based in this legalese concept, and like making sure young people and families are confused by the policies, so that, I don't know, so that they don't understand what's going on. So hopefully maybe having more adult allies, hopefully me, when I am a lot older, I can like go back into school systems and really help and support young people in that way. Or just help the community and just make sure that even no matter what age you are, just like having the confidence and like knowing your rights behind it. I think that's really helpful. So yeah, thank you.
I put this in the chat, but I think we've got time for one more comment, or share if people would prefer. And thank you, Aria. I think it's also refreshing to just hear from youth directly, even though you're sort of in the in-between of youth and adult.
Can I ask a question instead of make a comment based on what Michelle just shared? I think that that piece of history is really interesting. Was there a pivotal point that you mark? Because I mean, Columbine was well before that. So what was this turning point in the mid 2000s when, and is it just police became school staff, or is it police actually on campus?
So in 1994, and I'm just looking at the report itself so I don't get this messed up, there was both the COPS program that started, which was Community Orienting Policing Service Program. At the same time, the Guns Free School Act was passed in 1994. All of these, like what Monica was talking about at the very beginning of this, of youth of color in the early 90s being in groups of more than 2 or 3, it was this whole criminalizing of youth of color just for being youth of color. So with that criminalization, what you saw was the institutionalization of police officers as school staff. And prior to that, there might be like a security officer, but even things like school resource officers being a whole category of staffing and like having their own union that fights for their positions in Washington, D.C. debates. Like that really didn't start it. The presence started in the 90s, and then it wasn't really codified or solidified into the 2000s. And it's so interesting because right now we all think, oh, this is just normal. And what's really fascinating is that it hasn't been normal to have armed police officers as school staff. Like it's actually very, very recent in the last 20 years. So what we're arguing for is something that existed through most of American history, which is also something, it doesn't mean that young people haven't had problems with police officers being called to schools, and that police relationships with schools have sent plenty of young people to prison. But it's interesting in this debate. And a lot of the resolutions going on right now are about school resource officers specifically, or about police departments. Some of the bigger urbans have their own police departments. So it varies. There's been, I think, over 50 resolutions so far that have passed, and they're all varied in what they target specifically. Oh, it looks like we're going to close, but yeah.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. I don't know if your groups were like ours, where somebody was breaking down some serious knowledge when we were all forced back into this group. Gotta love those Zoom timers that force us back. I hope your groups were as engaging. I know that CO and KG were really breaking it down in our group. So a lot of appreciation to everybody for all of the wisdom that you shared, and know that this won't be the last space that we have to continue to connect and build and share and learn lessons with each other. As we move towards closing out today, CO mentioned in the overview is that the final section of the field scan is called The Future of Youth Power. And it takes a look at the progress, challenges, and vision forward that we heard from youth organizers and young people who are doing this work on the ground. I encourage you to read the report, but rather than doing that now and hitting the findings, we wanted to invite a youth organizer to come and talk about where we are, what we've learned, and the vision for the role of young people in advancing movements for social justice in this really critical moment. And I can think of nobody better to do that than James Lopez. James is a native of Rochester, New York, and now the executive director of the Power U Center for Social Change in Miami. He's an alum of Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity Directors Training, and a member of FCYO's Board Executive Committee. So with that, I will turn it over to James to share some of your reflections and thoughts on the future of youth power.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces and names I haven't seen in a minute. Just really grateful and humbled to be having this conversation and to sort of talk a little bit about what a vision or future of youth organizing may look like. It feels super right for me because, as Eric mentioned, I'm from a place, Rochester, New York, and then I kind of cut my teeth in organizing in Buffalo, New York, where there was no youth organizing organization. If you were a young person, you were kind of stuck in a so-called adult organizing group, and you were the young person who had potentially super idealistic ideas of what the future should look like, and you try to build with the adults. It's funny to know that now working with Power U and youth organizing, I promise you, although people don't really like to admit it, a lot of the issues that happened in so-called adult organizing are very similar, almost the exact same as issues that happen organizationally, youth organizing. So when people say youth organizing is fundamentally different, that has not been my experience. But it's also been really helpful for me in the context of the decades of this work. When I first joined Power U, my ability to really be grounded in the purpose of young people in history and youth organizing has come from my predecessor